what Bible translators have done
Yeah.
is they've taken a transliteration, English transliteration of the Greek word angelos,
Yeah.
and they use that to interpret the Hebrew word malach. It's ridiculous.
This is going to be exciting for me because I had ran across this in studying for a debate that I have coming up pretty soon and talking about the angel of the Lord. So I was refreshing my memory on some things pertaining to the angel of the Lord, or in Hebrew, the Malach Yahweh. And so I was going back over Exodus 23, verses 20 through 23. I guess it probably would be good for me to pull that up. In my studies, I have, I don't know, 6 or 7 commentaries on the book of Exodus. And I noticed in one of my commentaries, as I was going back and reading what the author had said, that he said some exegetes say that this is talking about Moses. It's interesting here. I didn't realize this, but on the screen there from the World English Bible, which is actually an offshoot of the 1901 American Standard Version, they actually don't capitalize the word angel here. In my personal Bible, in my HCSB, they put a capital A.
Right.
Other places, they'll put a lowercase a, probably because they think it's a heavenly messenger, a celestial divine being. But in some cases, it's a capital A, and they put that for a reason that maybe I'll let you explain here momentarily. But I found that some commentators say that this is talking about Moses. Others say that it's talking about a celestial angel, a heavenly messenger. And then others think that it's talking about Yahweh himself, or is a theophany or Christophany, some kind of appearance of Christ pre-humanity
Right.
in the Old Testament. So then I was listening to you talk on, I can't remember what it was. It was on some interview or discussion you were having about the angel of the Lord. And you mentioned that your view was that this was Moses, and you didn't go into it a whole lot, but you said you can read about it on my blog. And so that evening, I spent some time going over and finding it on your blog, and I read the entire thing. And so there were some points that I'd never even heard of before. So I said, this is extremely intriguing. I can see that there's validity to the position that Brother Troy takes on this text, but nobody has given him the opportunity, at least on video or audio, to explain this in more detail. So that's kind of an introductory to this portion of this interview. Brother Troy, explain to us the common Trinitarian view of this text. And then before we go into it in detail, explain to us your view in a nutshell.
Okay. So the common Trinitarian view is going to see this as this angel as a pre-incarnate Son of God. Okay. So this is the second person of the Trinity before he becomes incarnate as the man Jesus. Uh, this is a typical approach Trinitarians take to the appearance of uh, the angel of Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible, is to see this figure as the pre-incarnate Son of God. This passage doesn't specifically use the phrase Malach Yahweh, but
Right.
but they still, apply that principle to this passage, that this is the pre-incarnate Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
They link it with other passages, such as Jude 1, which has a variant in the manuscripts that reads that Jesus brought the people out of Egypt.
Hmm.
And so, they refer this passage, as saying the same thing, basically. Jesus in the pre-incarnate form brought, was sent by God the Father to bring the people out of Egypt. The interesting thing is that when I was doing my research for my article,
Mm-hmm.
well, because let me say this first. After I wrote, I had written about this in another article.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that was my two-part article on binitarianism in the Old Testament, and I was interacting with a lot of Michael Heiser's views. I was actually, working off of a video Michael Heiser had put out,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
talking about all the passages in the Old Testament uh, that show, supposedly show uh, the pre-incarnate Son of God active and at work, in the lives of the patriarchs and such. And it was at that time I had come to this, to the conclusion that Moses was the one being spoken of here in Exodus 23.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and another biblical Unitarian, had challenged me, like, to say, well, have you ever found anybody else in all of Christian history who had that view? And I was like, well, no, I never even really looked. This is just a conclusion I came to. Just I didn't know if anybody else did. And see, to me, that doesn't really bother me.
Right. Right.
I don't really determine what I believe based on how many other people believe it.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And that may come across as arrogant, but I don't mean it that way. It just means that people can be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't. I'm going to go by first what I have come to see in my personal study, and if I can be shown that I'm way off base, then I can accept that and change my view. But so I decided, well, all right, let me do some research. And it was after researching it and even finding more evidence that I wrote an article just on that passage, to
Yeah.
give it its own due. What I was surprised to discover was the earliest Christian interpretation
Yeah.
of that passage. I was very shocked to find out that all the way up until the time of Augustine. Now, there's only a handful of times that the passage is mentioned in the writings of the early church fathers before the time of Augustine. But the predominant view of this passage was that the angel there was a reference to Joshua.
Yeah. It shocked me too when I read
Yeah,
that in your article. I had never heard or read any expositor mention that. I
yeah,
was like, my eyes probably got big when I was when I was reading your article, and I was fascinated by that.
yeah. I was surprised to find that. So, and what that shows is now the reason they believe that was for, you know, it's wrong. Okay. The reason early church fathers believed it is because of a certain presupposition that they held, okay, that led
Mm-hmm.
them to interpret it that way.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing about that is to show that even early on, people understood that that angel could be referring to a human person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, not it doesn't have to necessarily be referring to a divine being or a heavenly messenger.
Yeah,
Uh,
briefly give us their reasoning, Brother Troy, if you don't mind. Briefly,
okay,
I think one
well,
of them was one of them Justin. Was it Justin Martin?
Justin, yes,
Yeah.
he was the first one to uh, in extant writings of Christians to mention this passage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see, from Justin's perspective, uh, the the supreme God would never lower himself to come down to earth and converse with man.
Mm.
Okay, so he sent his chief messenger, his chief agent, which is in Justin's mind is the second God. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
he calls him that second God. Justin specifically calls the Son, this second God who is uh, subordinate to the Maker of all things, and
Right.
who always does whatever the Maker of all things tells him to do.
Yeah.
Okay, and so all of the appearances of God in the Hebrew Bible is actually not the high God. Okay, it's the second God who comes down and manifests himself in human form uh, and speaks to the patriarchs. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so in Justin's mind, okay, it's the second God who is talking to Moses and tells Moses, "I will send my angel."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so unlike Trinitarians today who want to say the angel is the Son,
Mm-hmm.
in Justin's mind, it was the Son telling Moses, "I will send my angel."
Mm-hmm.
So the angel can't be the Son in Justin's mind, right? So Justin says, "Well, who could it be?" Okay, let's figure this out. Well, if you continue to read on in the passage, the Son, supposedly in Justin's mind, tells Moses that my name is in this angel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, if the name of the Son is Jesus, right,
Mm-hmm.
and his name is in this angel, then in Justin's mind, he makes the connection. It's got to be Joshua
Yeah, because
because
Yehoshua, his
right,
Yahweh's
it's
name
the
is there.
same name,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So he thinks that the Son is saying, "I'm going to send you an angel, and he's going to have the same name as me."
Hmm.
Okay, and so that's Justin's reasoning and his thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess then later Tertullian picked up on that, and he followed that Justin's lead in that, uh, and and so that became the predominant view of who this angel was. That it was
So
Joshua,
interesting. So
but
interesting.
totally based on a presupposition,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which turns out to be false. Uh, but but what I like about that is that, like I said, that it shows in the thinking of people that this angel does not necessarily have to be, because in the English versions it says
Mm-hmm.
angel. We think immediately, we go to, it's a celestial being
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or heavenly being.
Mm-hmm.
Where from the perspective of early church fathers, they could see this being a human person,
Yeah.
Joshua. So
What about if somebody tells you, Troy, like you get in a conversation and they say, "Well, Troy, it says angel.
yeah,
So don't you believe that God has angels? This has got to be one of his angels." What what would you say?
yeah. Well, right. It says angel in the English versions
Mm-hmm.
because this is one of my pet peeves. Okay, what Bible translators have done
Yeah.
is they've taken a transliteration, English transliteration of the Greek word angelos,
Yeah.
and they use that to interpret the Hebrew word malach. It's
Mm.
just it's ridiculous, but it's one of those what I call translational ruts
Mm-hmm.
that translators just can't seem to get out of this rut. They
Mm-hmm.
got to keep translating malach as angel because that's just a traditional way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is the word malach, the Hebrew word malach, doesn't really have in the etymological meaning of the word. It doesn't really have anything to say about a celestial being.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the word simply means a messenger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I prefer the word agent actually because I think the word messenger is too narrow.
Okay.
The word messenger gives the idea that this whoever is called a malak is simply bearing a message from one person to another.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you follow the use of the term throughout the Hebrew Bible, and a malak, there are quite a few passages where a malak is sent and he never gives a message.
Mm.
Okay, he's sent to perform some kind of task, to carry out something. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
work that he's sent to do. For instance, the two spies that Joshua sent to spy out Jericho
Mm-hmm.
before they went in and attacked it. Twice in the book of Joshua, those two spies are called a Malak, Malachim.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they were not bringing a message to anyone in
Mm.
Jericho, right? They were going to carry out a task. They were going to spy out the land. Okay?
Interesting.
So they were not messengers in that sense. They were agents, right? It's in fact an interesting note in the book of James in the New Testament. James, referring to these two spies, uses the word angelos.
Oh, wow.
To refer to these two spies.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we see that in the Hebrew Bible, the word malach can refer to any type of agent. Okay, whether it's a human agent or a celestial agent or heavenly agent. In fact, it probably appears more times in reference to human agents than it does to heavenly agents in the Hebrew Bible. It's just that we don't recognize it a lot of times that it's the same word, because obviously when in an English translation, if it's very clear in a passage that it's referring to a human person, the English translators don't use the word angel to translate it, right? They use a word messenger. Sometimes I know like NIV uses a number of words depending on the context, but for passages where it is clearly a human in view, they'll use messenger, envoy, or ambassador. But in passages where it seems to be clear that it's a heavenly being, English translations will use the word angel. The problem with this is there are a number of passages which are ambiguous as to whether it is a human or a heavenly messenger. Okay. In the majority of these passages, or I would say probably all of them, the English translators opt to just translate it as angel. Okay. But this could be misleading because in some of those passages, and I believe there are a number of these passages where the English has angel, where it is most likely referring to human person. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you just read in the English version, you're going to get the impression that it's a heavenly being.
Because in our minds now, the word angel means a heavenly being.
Heavenly being, exactly.
Yeah. Not necessarily back then. I think, isn't it a transliteration from the Septuagint or the Greek New Testament just over into English? When you look at angel, it comes from
it comes from the Greek word angelos. Yeah, it's a transliteration. So now in the New Testament, almost every use of the word angelos is referring to a heavenly message. Okay, you have a few instances like the passage I mentioned in James,
right,
where it's referring to humans, and there are a couple of passages which are ambiguous and could be referring to humans. Like once time Paul mentions messengers of Satan. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I don't think that's talking about angels of Satan. I think it's talking about false teachers. Okay, who he calls messengers of Satan, agents of Satan. So, when we look at Exodus 23:20, because we see the word angel in our English translations, we automatically just assume that it's referring to a heavenly being. But there's no real reason to think that it's talking about a heavenly being. I mean, there's nothing there in the context. Now, Trinitarians will try to say that what the text goes on to say about this angel proves that it's a heavenly being, not just a heavenly being, but it supposedly proves that it's the pre-incarnate Son of God. And I show in my article that they're just reading things into the language. The language does not demand that interpretation. It can very easily be interpreted from the perspective of that being a human agent.
Well,
Uh,
let's go into some of your key reasons here, Brother Troy, based on Exodus 23. I do invite everybody to actually go read
yes.
Brother Troy's article with an open Bible and maybe a notebook. But Brother Troy, you can share with us some of the highlights here, and this will wet people's whistle, so to speak.
All right. So first thing, people are going to object to this because this is God speaking to Moses.
Mm,
Okay. Moses is up on the mountain and God has given him all these instructions. All right. So God is saying to Moses, behold, I send an angel before you. So the first objection is going to say, well, the angel can't be Moses. God is speaking to Moses, saying, I'm going to send an angel before you.
mm,
Okay.
mm,
So how can an angel be Moses?
mm-hmm,
Well, it seems reasonable until you understand what's going on. What God is telling Moses is these are the things you are to go tell the Israelites. Okay. So everything that God is telling Moses, Moses is to repeat this to the Israelites.
okay.
Okay. So when God says, behold, I send an angel before you, the you is plural.
Mm, mm,
So God is not saying, look, Moses, I'm going to send an angel before you, Moses, to
mm-hmm,
keep you, Moses, by the way, and to bring you, Moses, into the place where I prepare. No, God is saying to Israel, Israel, I send an angel before you, or let's say I send an agent before you
mm-hmm,
to keep you by the way, to bring you to the place which I prepared.
mm-hmm.
Moses is to say these words to the Israelites.
I
Okay, so
see.
let's get that clear. This is not God talking to Moses, it's God talking to the Israelites. Moses is going to relay the message to them. Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Then we're told, first of all, that this angel is going to keep you by the way. Okay. So this word keep here uh, is a word, I'm not really, off the top of my head, I'm not going to remember the Hebrew word, but it's in my article. But it's a word that refers to guard, to watch over, protect, and it's used a lot of times in the Hebrew Bible to refer to what a shepherd does with a flock of sheep. Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He keeps them. That means he watches over them. He guards them. Uh, so what's interesting is I found a passage that where God is speaking about Moses,
Mm-hmm.
and he uses the exact same word to describe Moses's uh, job,
Mm.
okay, in bringing in shepherding the flock of Israel, okay. Um,
Do you
again,
happen to remember that passage off the top of your head?
yeah, let me see. I can pull up my article here. Yeah, okay. We're looking at Hosea 12:13. If you want to pull that up.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay, so by a prophet, Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt. Okay, now this prophet can be referring to nobody else but Moses.
Yeah.
I think everybody would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so by a prophet or by Moses, Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt, and by Moses, that's the Hebrew word, the exact Hebrew word that we
Yeah.
find in
That's
Exodus
shamar.
23.
Yeah, it's
Shamar.
shamar in
Okay,
both cases. Keep
right.
in Exodus, preserved in Hosea. Just a
Yeah,
difference in the English translation there.
right. But the same word. So we find out that Moses's job description, in a sense, was to keep the people, right?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So that corresponds with our passage here in Exodus 23. Also, if you look in let's see, Micah 6:4.
Okay. All right.
Uh, Yahweh says, "For I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of servants, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam.
Okay.
So this phrase here, I sent before you, is the exact phrase we find in Exodus 23, where God says, I I send an angel before you.
Wow.
Okay. I send an agent before you. Here, God is designating who the agents were. Moses, and he includes Aaron and Miriam. Okay, but we
Hmm.
know the chief agent was Moses.
Right.
So we go back to our passage in Exodus 23. Right off the bat, we see that the first two things said about this agent in Exodus 23
Hmm.
uh, are things that are said about Moses. Okay,
Wow.
that he is sent before you, okay,
Mm.
before the people of Israel, to keep you, to shamar you on the way, and to bring you into the place which I prepared, okay, to
Yeah.
bring you to the promised land.
It's good.
Okay, so another objection people would say, oh, well, it can't be Moses because Moses didn't bring them into the promised land, right? Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land, so this
Hmm.
can't be talking about Moses.
Hmm.
But that's it's really not thinking too deep uh, to come up with that, because at this point in the story, it was God's will for Moses to bring the people into the promised land. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
it was God's intention from the beginning. At this point, it was still in the plan.
Hmm.
But later, when Moses does a foolish thing and disobeys God, and this is much later in the story, uh, God forbids him then from being able to go into the promised land, and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
raises up Joshua to succeed him and to bring the people into the promised land. But at the point God is telling this to the Israelites,
Yeah.
okay, this is very early on. This is just after they've come out of a couple of months after they came out of Egypt. They're at Mount Sinai.
Hmm.
Moses is up on the mountain. He's receiving these instructions from God. At this point, Moses is still the one designated to bring them into the promised land. So that's not a uh, formidable objection to my proposal. All right, so then it says God tells the people of Israel now. He's not talking to Moses here. He's talking to the people of Israel. Pay attention to him. That is this agent that God is sending ahead of you or before
Hmm.
you. Let me just say this: to send someone before you, it could have two different meanings in the Hebrew. Okay, it could have the idea of sending someone like in advance of you, okay, like
Hmm.
ahead of you to get there before you, okay.
Hmm.
And this is how a lot of people, take this. But it could also mean to send someone before you. To be before the people means to lead them, okay, to be their leader,
Sure.
okay. And that's obviously how the Hosea passage we looked at takes the phrase, right? I send before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, right? In other words, I send them to lead you, to be your leaders, okay?
Sure.
So if God is raising up someone to be the leader, then it's necessary that these people pay attention to that leader, right? That
Yes.
they listen to what the leader says, listen to his voice, right? Um, this would be true of any prophet of God. God
Yeah.
sends a prophet. It is incumbent upon the people to whom he sent to pay attention to what he says,
Hmm.
to listen to his voice, because in effect, what the prophet says is the word of God,
Hmm.
and therefore the people are under an obligation to listen to the leader, the prophet, to hear his word, to pay attention, to take it to heart, uh, and to accept it as the word of God himself. So these phrases here uh, are clearly applicable to a human agent. Okay, there's nothing here that would necessitate this agent being a divine being.
Hmm.
Next, he says, "Don't provoke him." Okay,
Hmm.
uh, it's funny that we do see through the narrative as it continues on to the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers,
Hmm.
we see often that the people provoke Moses. Okay, they complain to him, that there's no water, there's no food. Why did you bring us out in this desert to die? Uh, they do a lot of provoking of Moses throughout the narrative. But here they're warned by God not to provoke his agent.
Hmm.
Okay. For he will not pardon your disobedience.
Hmm.
Okay. Now here is one of those phrases in this pericope that people point to say this is definitely talking about the pre-incarnate Son of God because he has the power to forgive sins.
Yeah, I've heard it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going with this, and
But I mean,
yeah,
it's just amazing what people read into something
yeah,
because the passage actually says, "For he will not pardon your disobedience." Okay.
yeah,
Now, I'll give him this. Okay, to say he will not pardon your disobedience could be taken. It could be taken in two ways.
yeah.
It could be taken as he has the power to pardon your disobedience, but he just won't do it.
Hmm.
Or it can mean he doesn't have the authority to do so.
Right,
Okay. In
right,
other words, the reason he will not pardon your disobedience is because he's not authorized to pardon your disobedience.
right. Yeah.
And the reason for this is when you read in the narratives in the story, as it progresses, and you see the people provoking Moses,
Hmm.
what you see is God takes it personal. When they complain against Moses, God then comes to Moses and he says, "Why are the people complaining against me? Why are they provoking me?"
Hmm.
Okay, because to provoke God's appointed agent is, in a sense, to provoke God, right? To reject God's agent is to reject God. To receive God's agent is to receive God. Okay, so God takes it personal. So to provoke Moses is an offense against God.
Hmm.
It's not really an offense against Moses.
I see.
So Moses doesn't have the authority to forgive their provoking of God.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
If you provoke the agent of God, you have provoked God, and only God can forgive you for that. Okay.
mm,
Can
hmm.
pardon you for that. Moses doesn't have the authority to do so. What we
Yeah.
do find happening in the story as it progresses is when the people provoke God and God's anger is aroused and he sends some kind of plague among the people and they start dying, then Moses begins to make intercession with God for the people
Hmm.
that God would pardon them, right?
Mm, yeah.
Uh, because they have provoked God. They haven't provoked Moses so much, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so uh, the statement in and of itself does not necessitate that this agent is a heavenly agent,
Hmm.
much less that it's the pre-incarnate Son of God.
Yeah.
Okay,
They usually
it's
go, I think I've heard them usually go to, like, if I'm remembering right, Mark chapter 2, where Yeshua says your sins are forgiven. And then some of the Jewish leaders say, who can forgive sins but God alone? And then they back read that here into Exodus 23,
right,
and they said, well, this angel can forgive sins, so this must be the pre-incarnate Yeshua or a Christophany, the pre-incarnate Christ. But as you've mentioned, and you're one of the two or three people I've ever heard say this, the text doesn't say that he has the authority to forgive sin. It specifically or directly says the exact opposite. But they
right.
read that into it because of I think, a preconceived notion that they're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
back read into the text.
exactly.
Yeah.
They're pre-programmed to think that way.
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, so the next thing he says is, "For my name is in him." Now, the way I take this is the phrase "for he will not pardon your transgression" is a parenthetical statement. Okay,
Okay.
really, if you take the parenthetical statement out, it's "do not
I
provoke
see.
him, for my name is in him."
I
Okay,
see. I
which
see.
is which is to say what I just said, that if you provoke him, you're provoking me. Okay,
Gotcha.
because he's there in my name. Okay, uh, so the for he will not pardon you is parenthetical. Okay,
Hmm.
uh, so this is another phrase that they take. You know, my name is in him. You hear people go into great detail about what this supposedly means.
Yeah.
Michael Heiser, uh, when he would talk about this passage, he would talk about what is known in scholarly circles as the name theology,
Yeah.
and it's this big, thing that scholars have invented about the name, and it really means the person and the presence, uh, and and so what this is supposedly saying is that this agent has the person or presence of God in him. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is supposed to denote that this is not simply just a regular heavenly angel. It's a pre-incarnate appearance of the Son of God. Okay, is how they want to the conclusion they want to draw from that statement.
Hmm.
My name is in him. But I mean, this look, it's just a bunch of reading into your own presuppositions here. Okay, because first of all, this is the only time that phrase is ever used in the Hebrew Bible.
Oh
Okay,
wow. Yeah.
so we don't have much to go on as far as like some kind of meaning that we can look somewhere else to try to draw what the meaning of it is. Okay,
Hmm.
but to just go immediately to this mystical uh, uh, meaning of the phrase is just it becomes obvious to me that people are just reading their presuppositions into the text. In my mind, you could say this about any agent that is sent by anyone, God or man.
Hmm.
If I send an agent to do something on my behalf,
Hmm.
then it can be said that my name is in him,
Yeah.
because he's not going in his own name, right?
Yeah.
He's not going there to transact business for himself, but for
Hmm.
me. So in a sense, my name is in him.
Yeah.
Okay. uh, we could take that, what all that would include and involve would be, it's my name that's at stake.
Sure.
Okay, my reputation is at stake in
Sure.
him performing this task on my behalf. My resources are behind him and backing him. My authority is behind him and backing him.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's nothing mystical about the phrase. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
but Trinitarians want to build this whole facade on this one phrase in the passage to try to make it
Mhm.
say something uh, that it really isn't saying.
You
Uh,
know, Brother Troy, I drive a
mhm.
septic tank truck for a living. I've done that for almost 27 years. And my father-in-law started the business back in the 70s, and his name is Arnold. And on the side of the truck, it says Arnold's Septic Tank Service. And there's been times when I went out to a job and the customer was, very pleased, and it shined a light not on Matthew, but on Arnold
Right,
because I came in his name. It didn't
right,
mean I was him,
right.
but he
No,
gave
that's
me
a
the
good.
authority to perform that service to the customer in his name.
Right,
So
right. And when you showed up at the door, people didn't care that your name was Matthew,
that's right.
right?
They
You
said,
were,
"Hey,
you
it's Arnold
were.
Septic Tank
That's
Service,"
exactly,
even though
exactly.
my name's Matthew.
Right, right. And I think Dale Tuggy has brought up this example before. When Pizza Hut delivery guy shows up at your door, you yell out to your wife, "Oh, Pizza Hut's here!"
Yeah.
You know, you don't say the name of the
Yeah.
delivery driver,
Yeah.
right? So the name of Pizza Hut is in him, right? It's in
Good
that
point.
in
Good
that
point.
delivery driver because he's
Yeah.
representing that company.
Yeah. And this is seen
So
all through Holy Scripture. I mean, even
yeah,
Jesus himself in John 5:43 said, "I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not. If another come in his own name, him you will receive. Obviously, another coming in his own name means by his own authority.
Exactly.
And he's saying, I didn't come by my own authority. Yeshua says, I come by my Father's name, in my Father's name.
Exactly.
So it's all through Scripture.
Yeah. And just to note, there's another way you can express the same thing. Yeshua does so in John, where he says, I think it's John 10. He says, "I am in the Father, and the Father is in me."
Ah,
It's expressing the same idea, right?
yeah, good point.
When the messenger shows up, the person who sent him, is in the
Mm,
messenger,
mm,
right?
mm,
Not literally, right?
right,
He's
right,
not
right.
like literally inside of him,
Yeah,
but he's in the messenger because everything the messenger, the agent, is doing and saying, he's doing and saying on behalf of the one who sent him,
mm,
in the authority of the one who sent him.
good
You
point.
know,
Good point.
so all of these expressions, there's nothing mystical about them. They're just common ways of talking about the idea of an agent, transacting business in the name of the person that
Yeah.
sent him.
So we haven't seen anything thus far in this text that would make it absolute that the Malak messenger or angel would have to be celestial or heavenly. We haven't seen anything that would lead us to that conclusion, except for an English translation and a presupposition on what the word angel means.
Exactly. If you have the right glasses on, you can see it.
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, but if you take the glasses off and you just read it, for itself, and then you don't have to be led to that conclusion.
Hmm.
Now, as it goes on to say, nothing else is really going to,
Okay.
if you indeed listen to his voice. Now, no, this is significant.
Okay.
But if you indeed listen to the agent's voice,
Hmm.
and do all that I speak,
Mm,
I would be God referring to himself,
mm,
then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries.
mm,
So here again, we just see the idea, the concept of when an agent speaks
mm.
on behalf of the one who sent him, this is his words are attributable to the one who sent him.
Good
Okay.
point. Good point.
Uh, Again, Trinitarians want to try to make something out of this. That, oh, look, there's a confusion of the persons here. Is it the agent speaking or is it God speaking? And they make it out like
Yeah.
Heiser was kind of big on doing this. He would read a passage like this, and he would give this faux confused look, like, we don't know if it's God or the agent speaking. No, we do. It's very simple, really.
Hmm.
When an agent speaks on behalf of God, that in effect is God speaking. Okay, there's nothing hard about that. There's nothing difficult. There's nothing mystical.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Brother Troy, just a quick point here. The other day, I was preaching a sermon and I brought up a text here in Exodus 18. I thought of it when you just mentioned this. Remember where Jethro comes to Moses? Jethro is his father in law, and he says, "What are you doing?" When he's judging the people there, he's sitting and judging them. They're bringing their cases to him. And,
Mhm.
and Moses says there in verse 15, he said to his father in law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God."
Mhm.
So inquire is ask a question. So when the people want to ask a question of God, Yahweh, they come to who? Moses.
Yeah,
Moses
yeah,
acts as an intermediary between God and the Israelites in his judgments. I just thought
right.
that would go along with what you said there.
Yeah, that's great. And when Moses inquires of the Lord for one of the Israelites, and he brings them the answer from the Lord,
Hmm.
that person, can go home and say, "The Lord told me."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, right? Would he
Yeah.
be wrong to say, "The Lord told me," because it
No,
was actually Moses that
no.
spoke the words?
Good
No,
point. Good point.
he would say, "The Lord told me,"
Yeah.
and
Good
and
point.
he would be right because Moses is speaking on behalf of God.
Hmm.
So
Excellent. Excellent
yeah, so
point.
that's all that's going on here. So, and then he continues on, "For my agent shall go before you and bring you." Okay, so again, nothing, if we translate this word malak as agent,
Hmm.
okay, then it leaves open the possibility that it's not referring to a heavenly messenger. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Now, some people reject, well, Moses is never called a malak anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. So
Hmm.
why would we accept here? Well, that's kind of a circular argument in a sense, because let's say there was no other place in the Hebrew Bible where
Mhm.
Moses was called a Malak.
Mhm.
Would that mean he couldn't be called a Malak in this one place?
No.
Well, no, you're assuming because there was no other place he's called a Malak, then he couldn't be being called a Malak here.
Mm.
But that's a circular argument. There's no reason why he couldn't be called a Malak one time in the Hebrew Bible.
Mm.
But I think there are other places where he is referred to as a Malak.
Oh wow.
Uh, First of all, let's just say there wasn't any other place where he's referred to as a Malak. Okay,
Mm.
we could still conclude that it is proper for Moses to be called a Malak.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
by simple logic. Okay, so this is in my article. I give two syllogisms. Okay, the first one says first premise is that uh, prophets are called Malakim. Okay, and I give a number of verses which clearly, unambiguously give the designation Malakim to human prophets.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
then the second premise is Moses is a prophet.
Yeah.
Okay, and I give verses that call Moses, specifically call him a prophet. The conclusion:
Hmm.
Moses is a Malak.
Good
Okay,
point. Excellent.
it's a logical deduction, and you wouldn't really need to have multiple passages where Moses is referred to as a Malak. Okay,
Mm.
he can properly be titled a Malak based on that logical syllogism. Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I think we do have other passages. So uh, go to Numbers.
All right. So Numbers 20 and 14.
Okay, so at this part in the story, uh, the Israelites come up to the border of Edom, and so Moses sends some Malakim, with a letter to the king of Edom,
Mhm.
and this is what the letter says, verse 14. Okay, Moses sent Malakim
Hmm.
from Kadesh to the king of Edom, saying, "Thus says your brother Israel."
Mm.
Okay, now it's important to understand that this letter is being written not by Moses or from the perspective of Moses, but from the perspective of Israel,
I see.
okay, of
I
the
see.
nation of Israel. Thus says your brother Israel.
Mm.
You know all the travail that has happened to us, how our fathers went down into Egypt, and we lived in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians mistreated us and our fathers. And when we cried to Yahweh, he heard our voice and sent a Malak and brought us out of Egypt.
Ah.
Behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the edge of your border.
Mm.
Please let us pass through the land. Okay,
Mm.
so here it it says from Israel's perspective, Israel as a nation speaking, our fathers went down to Egypt. We lived there for a long time. The Egyptians mistreated us. We cried out to Yahweh.
Mhm.
Yahweh heard our voice, and he sent an agent, a Malak, and brought us out of Egypt.
Mm.
Okay. Now, this is one of those passages, along with Exodus 23:20 and probably Isaiah 61, where the dominant view in Christianity has come to be that God sent an angel to deliver the people of Israel out of Egypt. Besides Moses, he sent an angel,
Mm.
okay, a divine being. And most Orthodox Christians are going to take that angel to be a pre-incarnate Son of God.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
My whole thesis is there was no heavenly messenger sent to deliver the people of Israel out of Egypt. God sent Moses to
Hmm.
do that job. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's all over the Hebrew Bible, right?
Sure.
Not just in the story itself, but later in in the Hebrew Bible, whenever someone recounts that history
Mhm.
in the Psalms or something, and they talk about the the people being in Egypt and coming out, they always refer to Moses as the person who brought them out. They never, if you go check this, they never, in recounting that story, they never mention an angel being sent to deliver the people out of Egypt.
Yeah, that's
They
good.
always mention Moses. Moses is the one God sent. Now, if you go over to Exodus 3,
All right, let's do that.
this is how we know that the passage in Numbers 20 is referring to Moses. Exodus 3, okay, we all familiar with this passage. God appears, or an angel of the Lord appears to Moses in a burning bush, right?
Verse 2.
Right. Okay, but you go down to verse 7.
Okay.
Okay, so Yahweh speaking, says, Yahweh said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows.
Hmm.
All right, just right there. Look at the similarity of this verse to what
Yeah.
we just read in Numbers, all right,
Yeah.
where Israel is saying, we were in Egypt, we were mistreated, we cried out to Yahweh, and he heard our cry.
Hmm.
Okay. So the same thing is being said here. God says, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I've
Hmm.
heard their cry. And now he says in verse 8, I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, so forth, so forth.
Yeah.
Now, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. Moreover, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you, Moses, to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, here's the thing. We have two passages which say God sent someone to deliver the people of Israel out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
One passage says it's a Malach that he sent.
Mm-hmm.
The other passage says it's Moses that he sent.
Mm.
In the one that says Moses, it's clear, right? We don't have to wonder who he's talking about.
Right.
It's clearly Moses. Okay. In the Numbers passage, we might be led to wonder, well, who exactly is the Malach that's being sent?
Hmm.
But why should we think it's anybody different than who was sent in Exodus 3?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason whatsoever to think it's anybody different than the one God commissioned to do the job,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Moses was the one commissioned to do the job by God in Exodus 3. When the people of Israel are writing this letter to the king of Edom and they're explaining this, and they say God sent a Malach to deliver us,
Yeah.
why do we assume it's referring to someone different than Moses?
Good point.
It's an assumption based on presuppositions,
Yeah.
is all it is. There's no reason not to accept the fact that Moses is the Malach referred to in Numbers 20.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a question, and I can't remember if you dealt with this in your article. I want to say Exodus 33.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so right here in verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses. Hold on, let me make sure. Give me a second here. Okay, yeah, I have it pulled up. Yahweh spoke to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people that you have brought up out of the land of Egypt to the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Jebusite to a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 3, for I will not go up among you. I take that I as Yahweh. For I will not go up
Mm-hmm.
among you, for you are a stiff-necked people, lest I consume you on the way. Now, I've used this text before as a parallel to Exodus 23 because it mentions those Canaanite nations in Exodus 23, verse 23, I think it is. And here it mentions them again here in verse 2 in Exodus
Mm-hmm.
33. But it looks like Yahweh is speaking to Moses and telling Moses, I'll send an angel before you. but I won't go up among you. So I've told people this is the same angel as in Exodus 23. And based on this text, it can't be Yahweh or like a theophany or Christophany, because, they say the Son is Yahweh too, Trinitarians do.
Right.
How would you answer this text and describe, how would you understand this
Okay.
angel right here? Yeah.
All right. I do address this in my
Okay.
in the article. Okay.
Okay.
And the way I deal with this is on that passage, Exodus 33:2. I say, once again, God promises to send a Malach before them. But is this the same Malach promise in 23:20?
Hmm.
In my opinion, it is possible to see this Malach also as Moses.
Hmm.
That is, God is once again reiterating his promise to the people to appoint Moses as their leader. We know, even though it is not stated explicitly, that these words are being communicated to the Israelite community through Moses, based on verse 3, where God says, because you are a stiff-necked people, and verse 4, which says, when the people heard these distressing words.
Hmm.
Okay, so yes, we can take this Malach as equivalent to that of Exodus 23:20, and so equivalent to Moses. But there is another way to understand this Malach, and that is as distinct from the Malach of Exodus 23:20, yet not as a celestial being.
Hmm.
Because it is through this agent that God says he will drive out the inhabitants of the land before they get there. Okay. It seems reasonable to equate this Malach with what God had told the people earlier in Exodus 23:28. Okay, if you want to pull that up, Exodus 23:28.
Yeah, let me go there real quick. Let's see.
All right, so 23:28. God said, I will send the hornet before you, which will drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you.
Very similar to the 33 chapter there.
Yeah. But here he says it's the hornet that he's going to send ahead of them. Now, this could also be taken as synonymous with verse 27, okay, which says, I will send my terror ahead of you, okay? But that's not necessary to the point. But also, we see the same idea reiterated later in Joshua 24:12. Go ahead and pull that up.
Okay.
Okay. So look what he says. Joshua's recounting what happened. He said, or recounting the words of Yahweh, I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out from before you. Okay. So every time the word, the two times that he mentions sending the hornet ahead of them, he uses the term to drive out the inhabitants before you. Okay. And this is the same thing that he says about in the Exodus 33 passage, where he says, I'm going to send a Malach to drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, and the Hittite, okay, and so forth. It's very possible in my mind that the Malach or the agent that God is sending before them is the hornet. Okay. And I would take that the idea of the hornet is just a way of expressing like a hornet swarm. Okay.
Sure.
So one thing God can do, is send a massive hornet swarm into the land of Canaan, which if it persists, people are just going to leave. If they can't get rid of these hornets and they're being stung by hornets constantly, they're going to migrate. They're going to migrate out of that place. And likely some did. Okay. So there would be less to contend with when they got there. Okay. But so there's no reason to, and some people may object, well, is the word Malach ever used in connection with a non-human or a non-celestial being, some kind of personal being? Can a word Malach apply to creatures like that, like a hornet? So someone might object to that, right? But that's, to me, that's simply begging the question, okay? For example, there's one instance in the like this may be the only instance again, this may be the only instance in the Bible where the word Malak is applied to a non-personal being. Okay,
Okay.
but that doesn't negate the fact that it can be used that way just at one time.
Sure.
Okay, like for instance, we have the word Mashiach being applied to a pagan king
Hmm.
in Isaiah 45:1, but
Sure.
only one time in the whole Bible.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we can't look at that and say, oh, well, this can't be referring to Cyrus because nowhere else in the Bible is the word Mashiach ever applied to a pagan king.
Hmm.
That's a circular argument, and it
Hmm.
doesn't work. Okay, all
Hmm.
the time, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So we can't say that because the word Malak is not applied to a non-personal agent that it can't be referring to a swarm of hornets. Okay,
Yeah.
but I think we do have, in fact, other examples like in Psalm 78, 49, 44 through 49, when the psalmist is recounting the plagues that God sent on Egypt.
Hmm.
He says, it says, he turned their river into blood. They could not drink from their streams. He sent swarms of flies that devoured them and
Hmm.
frogs that devastated them. All right. So he says he sent swarms of flies and frogs. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is, in a sense, agency language. Now, if you continue to read on in verse 49, he says, he sent forth upon them his hot anger, wrath, indignation, and hostility, sending destructive agents. And it uses the word malak there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine says a band of angels of evil.
Yeah. Okay. So a band of agents. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We want to. Okay. So in the English, it's going to say angels, and you're going to think, well, angels. But in this description that he just gave, the psalmist just gave, he doesn't mention angels, right?
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
mentions swarms of flies and frogs, and then grasshoppers and locusts. Okay, and
Interesting.
so these are God's agents in his destruction of Egypt at that time. His agents were the flies, the frogs, the grasshoppers, the locusts.
Hmm.
The hail and all those things. Those were the agents of God. So yes, the word malak I think can apply to a non
Wow.
personal being. And
Wow.
I think that Exodus 33:2 is probably referring to what Exodus 23, 28, and Joshua 24:12 are referring to,
Yeah.
the hornet swarm.
Very good. Very good. Troy, as we close out here, how does your view of Moses being the Malak here benefit? Or I mean, I guess people that have listened, I guess it benefits in this way that we see that this is a good, it might take a little time because people are so preconditioned, but this is a
Right.
good maybe talk or study to present to somebody of a Trinitarian persuasion that thinks the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ. But I mean, is that what you would say if I asked how would it benefit?
Well, yeah, sure. I've had this question put to me like, well, what does it matter? Well, first off, I mean, we should want to know what the Bible is actually means by what it says.
Hmm.
Okay, so I wouldn't just say, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, in the larger scheme of things, what does it matter? Okay, but I I want to know what God really means by what He said
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
Scripture. Okay,
yeah.
uh, beyond that, yes, it's a way to counteract the uh, this argument that Trinitarians have become uh, obsessed with, really, of equating the angel of the Lord with the pre-incarnate Son of God.
Hmm.
I mean, it's very pervasive. I mean, throughout uh, in Trinitarian apologists, in their YouTube videos, their articles. I mean, it's just it's ubiquitous. But This kind of throws a little, uh, kind of throws a wet blanket on that argument,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
shows that if people are misreading
Mm,
a passage like this, then is it possible they're misreading all the passages about the angel of
yeah.
the Lord? My personal belief about the angel of the Lord, very quickly, is that the phrase Malach Yahweh is not referring to one sole entity that appears. Like every time you see the phrase Malach Yahweh, it's the same personal being that's showing up every time.
Right. Right.
The
Yeah.
word Malach Yahweh is just a phrase that can apply to any of God's agents and to all of God's agents, whether they're
Hmm.
human or they're heavenly. In
Yeah.
fact, we know of one case where Malach Yahweh is unambiguously applied to a human person, right?
Mm.
And that is in the prophet Haggai,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Sure.
Where
Sure.
he is specifically called the Malach Yahweh.
Yeah.
Okay.
The same phrase.
Yeah, the exact same phrase.
Yeah.
So the phrase is not a reference to a specific personal being.
Yeah.
Okay. It is a reference to any agent of God who God has sent to represent him in some kind of way, right?
Yeah.
So, and I have articles on that on
Yeah.
the angel of the Lord,
I encourage
and
everybody to go and read those articles. Years ago, Brother Troy, my father-in-law, he's almost 80 years old, and he's a avid Bible student. I was his disciple for about 8 years before I ever started to teach. And he has a tendency to find things in the scriptures that nobody else finds. And when you see them, they're so easy to see. And it's like, why haven't we seen this before? I remember when he told me, you remember where, was it Elijah, the prophet Elijah? He prayed and he said, they've killed the prophets and all that. I'm the only one left. Is it First Kings 18?
yeah,
And then the preachers, I grew up in the Pentecostal church, so the preachers, they would preach this text and say, but Elijah wasn't the only one left. The Lord had reserved 7,000. And my father-in-law showed me one day, we went and looked at that text, and he said Elijah was the only prophet left. The 7,000 that had been reserved were 7,000 lay Israelite people that had not been in on killing the other prophets. But Elijah really was the only prophet left. So the
mm,
7,000 reserved weren't 7,000 prophets. Now, when you go back and read that, you can't read it any other way. You can't unsee it once you see it. But
right.
until you look at it and actually see it, you have a preconception because you've heard so many sermons from a pulpit saying it with a little bit of a twist on it. So it's so important, brothers and sisters. It's so important for us to reevaluate some of these texts that we think we may have a good handle on, but we haven't really spent ample amount of time in the text. And I think Brother Troy has shown us and give us a taste here of Exodus 23. I encourage everybody to go to his blog site, Let the Truth Come Out blog.wordpress.com. Thank you for your time, Troy. I feel like I owe you something.
Oh,
Because
it was my privilege, man. Really,
you're a
very
blessing.
excited. Like you're the first person, to express uh, an interest in this article. I mean,
Mm,
I thought it
mm,
would generate more interest, but it seemed to get people, even biblical Unitarians, kind of mad at me
yeah,
because they have their own preconceived idea of what this angel is, right?
yeah, yeah.
And now I come along and tell them it's Moses. Who are you to tell us it's Moses? Uh, but so it didn't really generate the kind of interest I expected it to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come.
You're welcome, brother.
And look, you'll find out in the article there's a lot more to it than what I was
Sure.
able to say here. I give some, I show some other people, because I didn't know at the time when I discovered all this and wrote the article. Only after I was challenged by another BU, I went and tried to find anybody, if there was anybody else who thought this too.
Yeah.
And I did find there are a number of
Yes.
few Christian commentators who take this approach, and there's some Jewish commentators who also see the angel in Exodus 23:20 as referring to Moses. So
Yeah.
I was glad to find out I wasn't on an island by myself uh, on
Yeah.
this opinion. So
Well, bless you, brother. Bless you for your time and your study, and may Yahweh give you many more years, man. Many more years. You're. I'm
yeah,
guessing just by the chronology, you're in your 60s now.
just made 62 earlier this month. Yeah,
62. All right. So praise Yahweh. Thank you, brother. Thank
amen,
you for your
amen.
time. Have a
Thank
good
you,
rest
brother.
of the day.
You too, brother.